You're taking big breaths. I can hear you. Do you need a little puff? Do you need some Ventolin? Is it my cats?
No.
Okay, good.
I'm good.
All right.
I'm good.
So here we are. We took a little break, but we're back now, and the new academic year has started. And we've started back with our podcast. I'm very lucky today. We've got someone in who is a Londoner, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and the topic we're going to talk about today.
Well, I'm Darren Goode. I'm a UK trained teacher. Started my teaching career in London, I think 13 years ago now. Some of it in the classroom, leadership, middle leadership, and now in senior leadership in Qatar.
Oh, very good. So you've kind of spanned all of the elements of being in education.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Your topic, your passion, if I can call it your passion, is about self-directed professional development and helping teachers and admin really recognize how they can self-direct themselves and encourage their schools to get into it.
Really, my passion has always been teaching and learning. I think probably 99.9% of people in education get involved in education because they love teaching. They love imparting knowledge, they love to see students make progress, but we know that the fundamental person in the room is the teacher.
Right.
And the person who is there to facilitate progress and help kids move from one stage to another. And having taught in London in some really deprived communities, I'm acutely aware of the impact a good teacher has. Countless studies show that.
I agree with you completely. Not only do they have an impact, I mean, you really are shaping young lives.
The biggest lever really for, I guess, academic success is the competence of the teacher.
Here we go. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of it. I was wondering how you were going to tie all of this together, and you just have very eloquently saying competency of the teacher. So go on.
So because of that, it's crucial that teachers develop.
Okay.
And I guess in most teacher training courses, you have your training year, and then you have your kind of probation year where you're, I guess, let loose on the kids. And you're closely monitored. There's usually a structured program in place. So if I'm thinking from the UK perspective, after you do your teacher training, you then do something called an NQT year, which is a newly qualified teacher's year.
Right.
And successful completion of that gives you QTS, and that's quite rigorous. It's quite difficult to pass, and you have to do it within 2 years. So that's quite intensive, and teachers make a lot of development. I'll perhaps say the first maybe 2 to 4 years.
Okay.
That's when they make the most rapid development.
Okay.
Then that kind of peters out. And for me, that's an issue, that's a problem. Because, you know, if you're hanging around in a profession, you should be getting better and better year upon year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're talking about a growth plateau.
Absolutely.
Okay, so go on.
You have your whole school kind of professional development agenda.
Yes.
And the quality of that ranges. There's so much variance depending on where you are in the world, where you are in a particular district,
Yep.
a particular chain of schools within a particular district. I'm a champion of the kind of autodidact.
Okay, so you noticed a gap.
Yeah.
That there tends not to be sort of a structured self-development PD plan or even structured school plans.
That's right.
It becomes so varied, everything's kind of getting piled on and nobody's really growing at all.
That's right.
Okay.
Or not at the rate they could be or should be growing.
Okay.
And sometimes those whole school agendas aren't necessarily aligned to an individual teacher.
Very good.
So I think it's really about taking ownership of one's PD. And not waiting for people to develop you. Being cognizant of just a few strategies that you can, that are minimal really, in terms of preparation, in terms of the time it takes.
Okay.
Because most teachers are time poor.
Yes.
You show me one who isn't. And
No, absolutely. Not only is it a time poor thing, but we're talking about administration, we're talking about school goals, we're talking about team goals. I have never seen a line of work that you have forced collaboration, which there should be. I'm a big believer in collaboration. However, I respect what you're saying. Where does that end, where we end up with the time to sit and think, how am I the best teacher I can be, not just for the students, but for me in general? So how do we recognize that, if I can ask you that?
That's right. Firstly, there needs to be a willingness
Okay.
for one to develop. It's a mindset, really, isn't it? It's an attitude.
It is.
That ethic of getting better. And I think once that's there, then there's no limit to how much people can progress.
Okay.
I think it starts with leadership
Agree.
and developing a culture of continuous improvement.
So developing a culture of continuous improvement. So how do you think we could do that? How does that look in a school?
So I think leaders need to be really explicit about that.
Okay.
That we are a school
Okay.
that values continuous improvement.
Okay.
And we start the conversation. How do we improve?
Very good. Okay.
And once we started the conversation, we capture some of those nuggets about or concerning what effective self-directed improvement actually looks like.
That's so we can model it, not just model it, but describe it to the teachers to the point that we can say, we don't want you taking out what you taught last year and thinking this is okay for every year. Is that a discussion we can be having? Can we phrase it that way?
I think a good way to start would be initiating the conversation in faculties and
Okay.
department teams.
Right. How would that conversation look?
So maybe after a particular unit of work
Okay.
or a particular project, it's then evaluating the effectiveness of that and looking at various forms of data. What does the progress data look like?
Right.
What does the students' work look like? Have we solicited student voice about how it's impacted them and how they feel about the diet they're getting every day in this particular subject? And then from there, I guess faculty members can start to have the conversation about what's working and what's not working.
Where their strengths are and what they need to develop.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we do that, we then consider it aligning with school and grade goals, or do we consider our teachers thinking, this is where I think I need to develop to be the best teacher I can be? And what if that doesn't align with the school they're at right now?
That's a really good question. There are always conflicting priorities.
Yes, especially with teachers. Everybody has a style. Every teacher has, and every administrator has a style.
Yes, and they should be allowed to have their style.
Absolutely.
So long as it's not detrimental to the organisation as a whole.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be a balance between whole school priorities.
Okay.
So these are the things that we all need to achieve together.
Okay.
So your kind of broad goals, if you like.
Yes.
But then it gets down to the kind of minutiae of what does that look like in particular subjects.
Oh, I love that, the minutiae. I think that's, yes, go on.
Take, for example, something as broad as marking.
Okay.
Assessing students' work. In the humanities subjects, that's going to look far different than it does in PE, where the students don't write.
Yes.
Unless they're doing it for a formal exam like an IGCSE or A-level exam or baccalaureate. So the discussion needs to happen at whole school level, but then breaking down or getting together in pods, if you like, and thinking about what that means for our subject, and then what does that look like in my classroom on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. What would be an effective self-directed development plan? If you can, for PE or humanities, can you walk us through what you think a teacher who is effectively self-directing their professional development would begin with their plan, and how would that look?
One of the key strategies for me would be asking to be observed.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So it's real simple, isn't it?
It is. And yet it's such a difficult, it's such a hard thing to do. You really have to trust that whoever is coming in is giving you constructive criticism or constructive praise, either way. But yeah, it is an easy concept that can be very difficult.
Because most observations, in my experience, are high stakes.
Agreed.
You know, a teacher could be in danger of losing their job if they have a bad observation. So again, it comes back to culture, doesn't it? The culture that we create as leaders, that these observations aren't one-off events, and they're not a singular model of judging you.
We shouldn't be afraid.
Precisely. And if it's done from the perspective of growth mindset, then teachers can start to understand that this isn't something that's being done to me, it's something that's being done for me and with me. So if you ask to be observed, it's that fly on the wall, isn't it?
And I think that is such a good way to put it. If we can instill a culture of this is being done for me and with me, like it all becomes part of the mindset. Okay, go on.
Yeah.
Go on.
So, for example, in my NQT year,
right.
I had the deputy head of school next door to me, and he was a great guy. He was somebody I looked up to. He was a great leader. Whilst my kids were kicking off in the classroom, you could hear a pin drop in his. And I thought, I want that.
Right.
You know, one day I want to get to that level.
Right.
And I just said, could you observe me one day? And he was a bit taken aback.
Right.
And he said, you know, that fills me with confidence that here you are, an NQT, who's not afraid of being observed and getting feedback on your teaching. So he came and observed me, and it was great. And he gave me some great feedback. And what was great, it was quite affirming to know that I was on the right track.
Oh, very good.
That too, as an NQT, because sometimes you don't know how you're doing.
Absolutely. And I guess that can also lead to how you self-monitor. You can make the notes, right?
Absolutely.
So is that what you did?
Yes. And then that's where the group accountability comes in.
Right.
Because one of the things he picked up on was the inconsistency of my marking. So
interesting.
I might have 10 books that were marked in real detail, and then maybe 5 where I had a couple of ticks in and a few smiley faces.
Interesting.
And he said, just keep it consistent. That's stuck with me ever since. This was 13 years ago, and I haven't forgotten that.
That is such a good example of what someone can get from mentoring, and what the mentorer gets, you know, to deliver, that you've had that impact. And it also speaks to the fact that we should be lifelong learners.
Another strategy similar to the first one really would be enlist a mentor or a coach.
Yeah. So it's almost like changing how we look at professional development as well, because of course traditional professional development, we think we need to go somewhere, sit with somebody and have them talk on a broad subject. Right. When we're talking about your last 2 examples, we're getting pretty specific.
Yes.
We're talking about, for lack of a better word, let's say tweaks, right? Which can have a huge impact like it did on you, which I've never thought of it that way before. So that's an interesting way to look at professional development. It's kind of taking the broad focus and really narrowing it down to the little tweaks that we can bring in to improve our day to day.
Yeah. Building a community of learning is one of the biggest drivers of teacher improvement.
Okay.
If you look at the academic studies and the research done, it's what they call collective teacher efficacy.
Okay.
And this idea that we get teachers talking. I think we underestimate the value of talk in development.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think when it's this idea of explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge.
Okay.
Explicit skills and tacit skills.
Okay.
And most of us have tacit skills. These are things that we almost do automatically. They become automated.
Okay.
We can't quite put our finger on what makes a great musician great, because there's a tacit knowledge there. Once they start to articulate it, that tacit then becomes explicit.
Okay.
But that conversation has to happen. That dialogue needs to take place.
Right.
And once teachers get together, or any professional, once they get together and they begin to discuss what effective practice looks like, you're capturing it. You're ultimately distilling it, aren't you, into its nuts and bolts.
Right.
And once you've distilled it, you've got that platform to then replicate it.
Okay.
And train others in that particular way on what effective methods look like.
Interesting. So you can literally create a community of teacher learners or admin learners, and like you said, it's all kind of being driven through talk.
Yeah.
So can we say that it's really then difficult to measure? How you would really have to know within yourself, or would you be asking other people? Do you see change? How do you see self-directed PD being known that it's working? How would you measure success? Because of course, being in education, you know that we spend a lot of time measuring success because there's limited funds. But in saying that, the way you're describing self-directed PD, it's not a huge input of cash that you would need to do that. Creating a community of learners is about personalities, and it's about developing people, and it's about investing in time, not necessarily money.
Yeah.
But how do you measure it?
Great question.
Teachers love to measure. Teachers love to measure.
We do. I think there are several tools to measure. One of the most obvious ones is student attainment.
Okay.
You know, are students performing better?
Okay.
But that's a single measure.
Right.
Yeah, I say it's an obvious one, but it's not the only one. It's a single measure. Another one can be your success rate.
Okay.
So take, for example, behavior management. Are you having less conflictual interactions with students because you've changed something in your PD?
Okay.
That's something you can notice. That's something you can get somebody to sit in and monitor for you. You know, there's hard data. You know, you look at how many, behavior points or how many achievement points you've given.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're keeping. Would you recommend a journal? Do you think people should write, for example, this is what I talked about with my mentor, this is going to be my goal? Would you consider that part of self-directed PD?
Definitely.
Okay.
The role of journaling and just thinking about one's own thinking, that whole kind of metacognitive process,
right,
yields quite a lot if you go back to it.
Okay.
Because then you look at your reflections and you can look at the things you think you're doing successfully, the things you think you need to work on.
Okay.
So it almost becomes like a self-audit.
So do you think that as schools move towards this model, they should be creating sort of guidelines that they can give out regarding self-directed PD so that people can get sort of a jump start?
Suggestions should be given because it provides a starting point, doesn't it? For somebody who has no clue about where to start or how to go about improving themselves. Another powerful strategy for developing your own professionalism, I think the importance of academic reading.
Okay.
So one of the things we did in our school, we created a staff CPD library to stay current and be aware of how the educational landscape is changing.
Okay.
And being aware of the research out there.
You are definitely sticking to what you believe. You have something in mind that you believe about self-directed PD, and I think everything that you say does come back to that it's the importance of what you know about yourself, what you know about where education is going. So that's interesting.
I would advise some teachers, not everybody, and depending on your context as well, to take on a project. That project can be something that's your personal itch.
Okay.
That thing that either frustrates you or it's your hot button, whether that's the gender disparity in terms of attainment.
Yep.
You're passionate about girls' education.
Okay.
And empowerment of females in STEM, taking on a personal project.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I feel that's a form of PD because you have to really get under the skin of the issue that you're trying to resolve.
Right.
And you're thinking about solutions. You're looking at the problems and you're devising solutions that will work or might not work. But it does involve a conscientious engagement.
So what about sustainability?
It can be difficult to sustain these things in particular contexts.
It can.
Because depending on where you are, some schools just don't have the infrastructure to support that. Some teachers are harassed, they're harried, they constantly feel under pressure.
Yep.
And to be able to think critically and think introspectively.
Right.
I think you need the right conditions for that. So again, it comes back to leadership management, to create a culture and environment where there's enough space for people to, if you like, meander. And when I say meander, as in find a way.
Okay.
Towards your own path of self-improvement.
Okay.
And your growing sense of professionalism. A final strategy would be ask for an opportunity to lead. Or sometimes just take an opportunity to lead.
Okay, so by that, what do you mean to lead? In what context?
Yes, so you found something, or you found a gap.
Okay.
Something that's not quite working, and you take ownership of that gap and seek to fill it, and you're contributing to the organization and to the school by leading to, I guess, remedy that particular weakness.
Okay.
And there's an example that I'll give. There's an ICT teacher at our school. His name's Dan Kia, great guy. Okay. And his time was limited in giving feedback to every single student. And if you're an ICT teacher, you teach probably 2/3 of the school. And he developed something called ICT Experts, where he trained these young people to give feedback to weaker learners.
Oh, very good.
So he was almost able to kind of replicate himself.
Yes. And it's also giving leadership to students. There's many levels that I can see that working.
And he made quite a big deal of it. It became a whole school agenda, if you like. There was a big ceremony, a prize giving, awards. For me, that's leadership.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? And he just took the opportunity to lead. He didn't ask anybody.
Right.
You know, maybe he needed some funds to get the prizes and things like that. But he saw a gap and he filled it.
Right. How exciting. That's a really strong example of how we can self-direct our growth, because he must have learned things on so many levels doing it that way, and I think that's an example not everybody would have thought of. So thank you for that. I think that's a really good way to let us know what self-directed PD is. Oh, very good, Darren. I like that a lot. He'll be okay with us saying his name, right?
Trust me, he will. Yes.
So let me ask you this then. What are you doing for your own self-directed PD as an admin and as a male teacher?
If I were to self-audit, I'm always reading.
Okay.
So I tick the academic reading box. And by the way, Qatar National Library is a wonderful resource. You've got the online library as
Isn't
well.
it?
It's amazing.
Yes,
it's amazing.
I agree.
I'm facilitating a conversation with all members of staff at department level about what effective practice looks like and what that looks like in your classroom.
Right.
And then for myself, I keep an open door policy.
Okay.
So even as a senior leader, I want people to come in and see me teach.
Okay, and would you have somebody come in and watch you lead?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. I have a critical friend.
Very good.
We established that relationship last year, and I said, can you just come in and just look at my teaching?
Yep.
And you're almost going to act as my coach.
Yep.
And I think if leaders model that humility, because that's what it's about, humility, knowing that yes, I might be in a senior position, but I'm going to be humble enough to let you see my mistakes.
Oh, I
see
agree.
things
And
that
it
aren't
helps us change our view of mistakes,
Yeah.
which I think we really, as education progresses, we need to look at mistakes as learning opportunities, not necessary. And this is one of the reasons why. I think everything you're saying is really powerful, and I think they're really good strategies and how to immediately begin a self-directed PD plan. I think it's really going to resonate with people. So yeah, that's really good. Anything else? Make sure, read your notes, make sure we hit everything you want to hit.
I have a mentor
Okay.
in my first school, which I have very, very fond memories of.
Okay.
At the first school that I taught in, a wonderful, charismatic, brilliant leader.
Okay.
He was the head of school, and he led such a tremendous school improvement journey, and he's my mentor who I can pose questions to.
So you still are being mentored by him, you still ask him. So I feel as if a big part of your own self-directed PD is self-reflection. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's something leaders in particular should be engaged in quite a bit, is truly sitting and, this was my day today, this is what I think went well, this is what I think didn't, and these are the strategies I can go forward with improving?
Definitely. I think the ability to self-reflect, again, kind of lends itself to a self-audit.
Agreed.
You're able to identify what's not working, what is working, what are you good at, what's going successfully for you.
And it's not easy. So for you, has it become a habit?
Yes.
Self-reflection is now a habit. Do you think that's something people should, remind themselves of?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I'm probably paraphrasing, but Socrates says something like, the unexamined life is a wasted life. And
Very good.
And it's that idea of just that constant self-examination,
Right.
and that has become a habit. So I keep a journal.
Now, I can see that in you, and not everybody has that. They don't take the time to self-reflect, but in your experience in the long run, it served you to be a better teacher, leader, father, husband, friend,
Oh yeah.
all around?
Yeah.
Okay, and you were saying you keep a journal.
Yeah.
So can you tell us
Yeah.
what?
So, professionally speaking, I keep a leadership journal.
Right.
So
Very good.
every night I will jot maybe, 200-300 words.
Very good.
Or tap, I should say, into my
Right.
phone. And one day I'm going to do something with them. Those notes, I don't know, maybe put it into a book or something.
Good for you. Why not? Absolutely. Why not? I mean, you want to impart knowledge, and you've had the courage of your convictions to think, I do want to always be learning, and I do want to self-direct where I'm going. So I'm going to invest in this. And again, I think that's another strategy without it being called a strategy. Daily self-reflection.
Yeah. That's been really
Okay.
helpful for me.
And I guess nowadays too, you can do it in many ways. You can dictate it, you can
Yes.
write it, you can type it, so you would recommend that to leaders and teachers?
Oh, definitely, everybody.
Okay.
So even as a teacher, early career teacher, I kept an A4 jotter,
Very good.
and I would just write a few paragraphs in there, and that was strictly about my teaching.
Do you still have that?
I do.
So do you look back and think, oh my?
Yes. It can be quite humbling
Interesting.
when you realise you've been
Okay.
making the same mistake
Yes.
for the past 12 years, and you still haven't nailed it.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't like to look back and think about 10 years ago and the poor people I impacted then as opposed to now.
Yeah.
But okay,
Yeah,
great.
That's you can't sit there waiting for somebody to develop you.
Yes, I agree.
Because you might not be in that context. You might not be one of the fortunate members
Yeah.
of that organization, or just in that profession, to be in a context where you are grown.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's why, again, I say
bold.
I'm the champion of the autodidact.
Right.
That person, that you learn it through treading that path.
Right.
And desiring to get better. One of my mentors was a guy who I met during a PD he was delivering.
Oh, very interesting.
And
Okay.
he was phenomenal. He
Right.
was a great trainer.
Right.
And in the intermission, I just asked him, you know, where did you learn to train in that way? And would you be able to help me?
I think that's great. Be bold. I think that's really going to be impactful too, because you're right. You can't wait for it to happen to you. The very worst case scenario is someone says, no, I'm too busy.
Absolutely. And what's so devastating about
okay.
no?
Yeah.
You move on.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel comfortable in doing that, because not many people do,
Yes.
that could work, or that could grow out of an existing relationship. So again, the head teacher that I worked under, we had a really good relationship professionally. He was very caring over his staff. For want of a better phrase, he was almost like a father figure in that sense. He was quite nurturing.
That's a good word.
Yeah. So as soon as I moved into a position of leadership, I then got in contact with him and said, hey, you know, I've just been promoted.
Right.
I'm now in senior leadership.
Yep.
You're a man of great experience. Can we have a mentor-mentee relationship? And he was honored.
It is an honor to be asked, and we can, and you know, if someone says no, then it's just not a good fit, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You can move on and you can find somebody else. And I think you make a good point by saying maybe look back in your life. Who touched me at this moment, and is that something I could use now? It doesn't necessarily have to be education.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I've got mentors in various fields, professionally, personally.
Okay.
Whatever your needs are, really, where you want to grow and get the kind of, I guess, objective or some kind of expert advice.
And that can start your self-reflection habit.
Yes.
You need to sit there and think who's impacted. Okay, well, Darren, I really want to thank you. I think you've given some really good strategies. I think the way that you spoke and described it, and you brought in stories that people can relate to, was really impactful. So, you know, I thank you for coming today and putting yourself out there and talking about your passion. And we'll see you again.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Good.
very
I'm
much.
glad.
Thanks.
Good.